The Vision of the Vanquished, Knowledge Europe Destroyed and that the U.S. Power Structure Still Fears, by Angela Valenzuela. There's a great deal to ponder when we sit with the historical record, not from the conqueror's pen, but from the voices of those who survived conquest. One learns of some of these communities through Miguel León-Portilla's landmark work, The Broken Spears, in Spanish, Visión de los vencidos, drawn from the original Nahuatl sources written in the 1500s and published in 1959. The book offers the closest account that we have of the invasion of Tenochtitlan, today's Mexico City, from the perspective of the invaded. León-Portilla's contribution was not to interpret these voices into comfort, but to preserve them as testimony, gathered and preserved across numerous archives by the children of survivors, allowing the vanquished to speak in their own words. This fullest surviving account reveals not only the great cultural and linguistic diversity within and around Tenochtitlan, but also its extraordinary sophistication. At the time of the Spanish invasion, Tenochtitlan was a meticulously planned metropolis with engineered causeways, freshwater aqueducts, regulated markets, and sanitation systems that surpassed those of most European cities. They were very smart in so many ways, but the water was just out of this world. They had to bring the good water in and get the bad water out while living in the middle of a lake, Lake Texcoco. It practiced chinampa agriculture, one of the most productive and sustainable farming systems ever developed, and maintained universal education through formal schools for both elites and commoners. So they had educación superior, higher education, as well as primary and secondary, but it had different names. While much of Europe struggled with overcrowding, open sewers, and periodic famine, Tenochtitlan functioned as a clean, ordered, ecologically attuned urban center. I do encourage you to go to my website. You can see a 3D digital reconstruction of Tenochtitlan by Thomas Cole from 2017. Perhaps the most revealing evidence of Tenochtitlan's advancement comes from Spanish eyewitnesses themselves. Bernal Díaz del Castillo, a conquistador who came with Cortés, who participated in the invasion, wrote in astonishment, quote, "We were amazed. All the great cities and towns built on the water. It all seemed like an enchantment from a book of chivalry." Díaz del Castillo compared Tenochtitlan to Venice, a widely regarded as, at the time, Europe's most advanced city. A comparison that carries extraordinary weight precisely because it comes from a hostile witness. This was not a primitive settlement encountered by Europeans bringing civilization to these poor peasants. It was a civilization Europe encountered and chose to destroy. The devastation was led by Hernán Cortés, whose actions would today be unambiguously described as war crimes. The violence was so severe that even Spain eventually distanced itself from him. Yet colonial narratives have long recast his annihilation of an advanced society, of course with his soldiers, his army, as discovery or progress or the cost of progress or civilization. One of the most haunting statements preserved in the Broken Spears comes from an indigenous eyewitness, paraphrased but searing in its clarity. They came, they conquered, I'm paraphrasing this, and they never once asked, what our cosmovision was. This sentence named colonial violence at its deepest level not only the theft of land and life, but the refusal to recognize another way of knowing in the world. León-Portilla does not attempt to resolve this wound. Aside from his methodological introduction, the book remains an anthology of voices. That restraint matters. It resists the colonial impulse to narrate devastation into closure or to translate loss into lessons that absolve the conqueror. The destruction of Tenochtitlan was not the result of cultural inferiority, but of a refusal to recognize another civilization as worthy of study, much less of existing. That refusal did not end in the 16th century. Today, it reappears in more bureaucratic and sanitized form, in the backlash against ethnic studies, in the dismantling of DEI initiatives, and in policies that treat minoritized knowledge as dangerous, divisive, or expendable. Once again, majorities move through institutions without asking the descendants of this same history what they know, or what might be redemptive about their ways of knowing, doing, and being in the world. Ethnic studies does precisely what conquest refused to do. It asks whose cosmovisions were silenced, what knowledge survived, and anyway, how those knowledge systems might offer us something more humane, truthful, and sustainable in ways needed going forward. That's precisely why it is being targeted. The attack on ethnic studies and DEI is not about rigor, neutrality, or free inquiry. It's about control, about preserving institutions that still cannot bear to ask what minoritized communities know, remember, value, and imagine beyond the colonial frame. There is a beyond. Visión de los vencidos reminds us that dismantling does not always arrive with swords or cannons. Sometimes it comes as legislation, budget cuts, appeals to neutrality, and so-called program, quote, unquote, consolidations that quietly strip resources, power, and voice, once again refusing to listen. Until we recognize these attacks for what they are, today's version of institutional dismantling or conquest, we will continue to mistake erasure for balance and domination for progress. None of this has to be feared. Asking what was never asked, listening to the descendants of the conquest, and recognizing the redemptive possibilities of their ways of knowing, doing, and being does not weaken institutions. It humanizes them. What threatens democratic life is not ethnic studies or DEI, but the continued refusal to listen and know. Happy Christmas Eve. Happy Christmas. Thank you for listening.